Hey folks, and welcome to Typology, the show in which we explore the mystery of the human personality through the lens of the Enneagram. My name is Anthony Skinner, the producer of the show. Really happy to have you here today. Today we have a self-pres Enneagram 1 Wing 2. Chris Cook, you can hear him on his podcast Win Today with Christopher Cook on all platforms. And he is also a featured writer for Success Magazine, and he is a life coach. Well versed in the Enneagram. We get into numbers and subtypes and countertypes today and have a really interesting conversation where it ends up landing. So anyway, you're going to enjoy this one. And without any further ado, here is the host of our show, Ian Cron.
Chris Cook, Self-Preservation 1 with a 2-wing. Welcome to Typology Improver.
Thrilled to be here.
It's a delight, man. I'm so excited to have a 1 on the show today. I almost always get, little DMs and other stuff from 1s and 9s, which is, why have you not had more 1s on,
Yep.
and so
Yeah.
you're my response to my reply to all those 1s who deservedly so should have more 1s part of what we do.
Mm-hmm.
Chris, you're a podcaster, you're a one-on-one coach.
Yep.
You host that show, which is called Win Today.
I sure do.
with Christopher Cook. And I'm thrilled to have a 1 on the show, as I mentioned, but I'm really excited to have you on because you have a really interesting story with the Enneagram, and you are really familiar with it. And not all guests are. Right. Like I've had guests on, Anthony and I have had guests on where they get on and we learn they don't know it at all.
I'm on the show, so you can type me.
Yeah. It's happened more than once.
That's how it goes.
It's happened more than once. And,
Yeah.
and they often end poorly, I might add. So Chris, tell me how you learned about the Enneagram, and then let's jump into your story after that. So let's because I want to highlight that. Jump in.
Yeah, cool. So I first heard of the Enneagram in, late 2016, early 2017. Friends and mentors of mine named Jamie and Donna Winship, they live in the West Coast, had just spent some time with us, with our team. And Donna said one time, "You've got to check out the Enneagram." And I said, "The who?" And like many, I saw the Enneagram shape, and at first I was like, "No way," And I gave it a shot, and it was amazing. And then, after having taken the first assessment, Ian, I was unsure, but I was really intrigued. I read your book, so your book was actually my first entrance into the Enneagram, and the road back to you was the game changer for me because it put things down on a level I could not only understand, but then I could relate to my own life experiences. From that point, I just dove in with both feet and read Riso and Hudson's The Wisdom of the Enneagram, read both of Chris Hubert's books. You were on my podcast. I've had Hubert on my show, and it's just been this discovery. And as a Christian, I'll say this. My relationship with the Lord has improved so much because the Enneagram has been this navigating tool by which I'm saying, okay, now I understand in a better way how I hear him and how I relate to myself, how I uncover these subconscious motivations of perhaps believed lies to step in my true identity. So that's the nickel and dime tour of my experience.
I'm really glad you mentioned, these unconscious motivations, because in my new book, which will be out next year, one of the things that I try to help people understand is that the unconscious motivation is a lie.
Yes.
And that lie, we know it's a lie because it is in direct opposition to the story of the gospel. And so if you're a 1, to believe unconsciously that you need to be perfect and to perfect the world in order to have a sense of control and mastery and to find love, that's a lie. You know, if you're a 2, you don't need to meet the needs of others in order to be loved. You know, if you're as a 3, you don't have to succeed in order to be loved. And so that I can go on through all 9 types, but so the key for transformation is really in part raising into conscious awareness what the unconscious motivation that has been the lie that has governed your life from the shadows is so much a piece of the healing journey, you know, so such a big piece. Okay. So you are a self-preservation 1, but that was not always your belief. So let's hit that and how that happened.
Oh, Ian, and direct me on how you want to go about this, but I'll just say this. When I first took the Enneagram assessment, which is not the latest assessment I took, I typed as a 6. And because I didn't know a ton about the Enneagram, I just went, oh, this is cool. So as a DISC coach, I went, okay, this makes sense because I'm a high C, high S on the DISC. So, okay, 6. But as I began to dive in, Ian, I sort of said, okay, I guess this is it. I see a lot of motivation in my life where I'm motivated by fear to self-protect, fear to control. I'm the ready, aim, maybe fire guy. So I related a lot to that. But I could never reconcile the wings. And so as I dove into the Enneagram, I said, okay, I get the 6 piece, but I can't reconcile either of these wings. So it left me in this place of saying, I wonder if I really am a 6, and just left it there. I suppose in many ways, I told a good friend of mine, I tried to force my way into a wing 7 box. You know, if I'm on staycation, if I'm enjoying life, then I found my more spontaneous nature come out. And there are parts of the 5 that I related to. I'm very detail oriented. But in some aspects of, I don't know if it's fair to say, parts of a 5 that are impersonal, I could never relate to that because I love people. So I found myself caught in this tension of saying, okay, in many ways, I understand that my dominant type is the wrestle between these 2 wings, but I struggled to reconcile either 5 or a 7 wing in.
You know, I'm really glad you're saying all this. Here's why. Number 1, tests are great data points, but they are not definitive. In other words, the only person who can truly determine their type, or the only measure that determines type, is self-verification. So the person has to look at that as a data point and go, good start. But if you have an intuition that, I just feel like there's some piece of this that's not fitting, then the journey has to continue. So you either have to find a Enneagram coach or Enneagram based therapist or whatever your person is, an expert, who can go over the results with you and figure it out, or you have to take responsibility for it yourself, right? And this is why it's important to know all 9 types, right? So fantastic. It's a good data point for all of our people to know that, okay? But this story gets even more interesting. And so finish it for people.
If it'd be helpful, I could kind of back up into my story.
Yes, totally.
Which would inform some of that. And stop me if I get a little too nerdy, because I love what I've done, Ian and Anthony, in this journey is I've incorporated a lot of neuroscience into this, which has both confirmed where I really believe I sit in the Enneagram, and then helped me to unpack the subconscious motivations that sort of lit up the tendencies of a dominant Enneagram type. So
right, geek away.
Cool.
Yeah. So I had an awesome childhood. It was my sister and me, raised by wonderful parents. I grew up with this great fascination to ask people questions. I had a microphone in my hand since the age of 3. I love asking people questions. I'm a curious type. And at the same time, I'll tell you guys this. One of the first things I saved up for as a little boy was a pleather briefcase, not a leather one, a pleather, the plastic leather hybrid,
Great.
because I wanted to keep all my papers in there, because that paperwork was orders, details, blueprints, and how I would help people. So I've always had this desire to say to people, share your vision with me, and I'm going to draw the blueprint up. It's what I do as a coach today, as a pastor today. I want to make people's lives better. I want to say, I see a complexity in your life, and I want to help you navigate through that. Not tell you what to do, but help you think, help you understand in a way that processes to a place of self-discovery. So I've always had that. Back to the story. Early on in life, though, there were some adverse childhood experiences that many would be familiar with. My parents divorced. That was really hard as a young boy. But then a couple of years, my mom was diagnosed with incurable cancer, multiple myeloma. And as a young boy, it was shocking. But then after 18 years of battling cancer, it became normalized in the disposition through which I thought about my life, others, life itself, the nature of the Lord. And because of the extent of time, it created this lens through which I looked. You know, I've heard it said that we don't see the world as it is. We see it as we are. Mm-hmm. So how was I? Scared? Perhaps because of how early this happened. And this is no one's fault. This is the subconscious narrative. This is the tape, right? Oh, if mom and dad got divorced and if mom got cancer when I was a little boy, that must tell me I'm abandoned. That must tell me I have to self-protect. That must tell me that I have to do good in order to be received as good. That also must tell me that if I make a mistake, maybe I am a mistake. Because if I was really loved, these things wouldn't be happening in my life. And so from a neuroscience perspective, now as an adult, I've learned that the subconscious is largely programmed from ages 0 to 7.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Trauma lives in the limbic system, and the subconscious mind is 1,000,000 times more powerful than the conscious. Mm-hmm. So no matter how great the goals I set before me, no matter how hard I work, if the subconscious is saying, you have to work to earn approval and love from others, you have to work to belong. It's those early adverse childhood experiences that perhaps informed those fear-based motivations. Now,
yes.
Having said that, I think I want to say that what happened in me is through those adverse childhood experiences, I had events that then said, you're not worthy of belonging and love. So I then adopted false identities that were motivated by fear, shame, and guilt. So my default narrative was either to self-protect or self-promote in life. And for me, it was self-protection. So all of those things were driving the bus in my life. And then as I became an adult, so many of those subconscious motivations, I wore them like a glove. And then that got normalized. And I went, I don't know the difference between my true self and my shadow self. Because I've been living according to the subconscious narrative for so long.
Yes.
That now the first time I encountered in this conversation, the Enneagram, guess what? It's my personal belief that my subconscious narrative, fed by a false identity, lit up the Enneagram in an untrue way.
Right.
And it wasn't until I found healing for the broken spirit and received my true identity that all of a sudden, when I typed, it better aligned with my true self.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. So it's interesting about self-pres ones.
Yeah.
As you know, I call ones, the improvers now, versus the perfectionists, and if these self-pres ones are the onest of the ones.
Yeah.
Okay. Sometimes that subtype is, we have signifiers for subtypes, right? And we would say that the subtype of one is called worry. It's called worry.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. They, like any self-pres type, they care a lot about safety, security, and comfort, and getting the basic needs of life met.
Mm-hmm.
When the self-type one, how do I want to say this? It is notorious for self-preservation ones to initially be typed as sixes. It's a fact in the literature. So that,
Whoa.
totally
That's
the fact
amazing.
of the literature, because both types tend to be anxious warriors.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Who often become physically tense, resentful, judgmental, a lot of the time, towards those who are not as concerned about personal survival as they are. Okay. And the sense of responsibility, that and the concern that they won't be able to fulfill their obligations. Right. And so anger gets triggered if someone or something, real or imagined, threatens personal survival. Right. And I'd say that more than anything else, this reveals how the anger, the self-pres one feels toward themselves for not being perfect and
So
therefore worthy of survival. Right. They're the most perfectionistic. They're the most controlling, typically, of the three ones, and their inner critic is harder on them than it is for the other two ones. Okay. And for those of you who are not watching this, but listening to it, Chris is nodding his head enthusiastically
Right.
as I read this. Right.
Yep.
So for self-pres ones, the passion of anger is is most repressed and least visible, because they're really experts at masking it. So compared to the other subtype of ones, it's hard to see anger in that self-pres one. It's very masked because they want to be good.
Yeah.
And so they don't want us to see it. For the social one, anger is kind of half masked. And I'm not going to go into why, but for the sexual one, it's barely masked at all. You see how, Anthony, it's so important.
Totally, yes.
Everyone, by the way, thinks of ones. When they think of a one, they think of a self-pres one.
Right.
They don't know there's two other ones.
Right.
And that they appear, or they present very, very differently.
Yes.
So, a self-pres one could be furious with you, but hide it behind a thin-lipped smile, because it's so repressed. They don't want anyone to see it, including themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's so repressed, it leaks out sideways, and they just sort of radiate the feeling of resentment to other people in an unconscious way, but it's because it's so repressed. And so part of the journey for the self-pres one is allowing their anger to become visible, because then all that repressed resentment and energy would be dissipated, and they would just move through the world in a more healthy way.
Chris, did you have that experience where people were perceiving you being angry when you didn't even know you were?
No, actually, what's interesting, let me walk that back. Here's what I do know, Anthony. Y'all nailed it. The inner critic in the one is more dominant than the inner committee in what I thought was a 6. So because of it, I'm so much harder on myself. And my love for people says, oh, it must be your fault, Chris. So the internal turmoil and the self-hate has been riled up to such a notch that I may put on the smile, and my closest friends and family know when I'm irritated.
Mm-hmm.
But I take it out on myself. And I'll just add this really quickly. I'll sprinkle this in. I believe that was the driver that uncorked an autoimmune disease 9 months after my mom died. It's the body attacking itself.
Wow.
Right. And that's trauma.
Yes,
Which is part of
precisely.
which is part of the reason I was excited about this conversation, because how many questions do we get about the Enneagram and trauma?
Oh, constantly.
It's constant,
Yeah.
right? And partly because, we all have an elevated awareness now about trauma. So many books have been out about trauma. Bessa Vanderkolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, which is what you're describing. This is
It's an
how the
amazing
body
book.
keeps
Yeah.
the score, and countless others. And so because of that, people want to know, well, how does trauma affect type?
Yes.
And what I hear you saying, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that trauma in part was what made it difficult for you to determine type.
Most definitely, Ian. And I would even say I'm grateful to you, because as I listen to typology, I love that you're one of the only ones that labels the Enneagram 1 the improver, not the perfectionist. Because perfectionism, the antithesis of excellence, is totally directed at myself. If I do well, I am worthy of love and belonging. That to me is a perfectionist motivation. Whereas the improver says, my motivation is I'm going to be my best for those who matter most. Therefore, I can operate from a place of wholeness and sufficiency instead of operating from a place of deficiency.
Good.
So good. And you actually just highlighted another thing about subtypes. I'm going to be I'm not going to be quiet about subtypes. It's important.
It's great.
For the one, they're very concerned. The self-pres one is very concerned about perfecting themselves, improving themselves. Interesting fact, the two biggest numbers that listen to our shows, buy our products, do different things. Number one is 9s. The second one is 1s. It's amazing. We just had someone a 9 on the show. I should have mentioned this, Anthony, that, for example, when we sell a course, they invariably are take the highest number of all the other 8. And in terms of sales, the 9 doubles it. If we sell 1,000 courses to a 5, it's 2,000 to a 9. It's crazy.
Wow.
Right? The number 2 number that listens and is in on what we do is our 1. So the self-preservation one is very concerned about perfecting themselves. I'm going to make this very, very simplistic. The social one is interested in modeling perfection for other people, right? And they can therefore feel okay in expressing their anger a little bit more than the self-pres one towards those who don't dig what they're doing. They're modeling, they're teaching. The sexual one, or 1-to-1 one, is much more concerned about perfecting others. And therefore feel justified in criticizing others who don't live up to that standard, but they're less concerned about perfecting themselves, right? So they have a quieter inner critic than you do. This is why this stuff's so important.
Yeah.
This is why it's so important. Okay, I'm talking too much.
I had a question.
Sure.
I was just wondering, Chris, you talked about the inner critic and leading to this intense self-hatred and kind of ratcheting it up.
Yeah.
How has the revelation of you being self-pres 1, how has it helped you with empathy toward yourself? How has it helped you deal with that critic?
The day I took the IEQ 9, I got an email actually from 2 of the leaders at IEQ 9, and we had this brilliant exchange back and forth, and I ended up taking it. And this is interesting. When I got my results, I emailed them right back. I was like, I'm a 6. What are you talking about? This must be wrong. Then I read it, and in fact, I have it right here. I'll tell you guys, when it's talking about worldview, focus of attention, core fears, etc. I wept, and I wept.
Can you read it?
And I wept. I'd be happy to.
Is there a little section of it that you could read?
For sure. Ian, here it is. This is the IEQ 9 description of my core fear, which read my mail and popped the balloon, guys. The core fear of the self-preservation Enneagram 1 is that there is something intrinsically wrong with you, being defective, And here it is, not good enough. Well, guess what? That confirmed the narrative I had in the subconscious beliefs since a little boy. Mom and dad wouldn't have gotten divorced, and mom wouldn't have gotten cancer and then later died 18 years later when we were believing for a miracle if there was something worthy of me being loved. I couldn't separate the two.
Mm.
And
Yes.
so it's those early things that drove that. Now, here it is. This is fascinating. The gifts that the self-preservation 1 Enneagram bring to the table, to the world, goodness, dignity, and this word literally makes me emotional. Wholeness.
Mm.
It's the passion of my message. It's the passion of what I do to help people.
Mm. Mm. And you know what's so beautiful is you're also making it clear to people, and I hope everyone hears this, that often 4s initially may think that they're 1s.
Mm.
And of course 4s go to the healthy side of 1, right? That's where they move on their arrow. But that, I'd say that next to 1s, 4s have the loudest inner critic.
Mm.
So, but for different reasons, right? But they have a very strong inner critic that reinforces the message of shame for the 4. So I'm really glad you said that, because what you were describing just then, a 4 would very much resonate with.
Mm.
You know,
Mhm.
the sense of the fatal flaw. What's wrong with me? They can't name it.
Right.
You know, all they could say is, if I were only a better kid, this wouldn't have happened. But they don't know how to define better. It's like, well, what about me is broken that if it were fixed would make me better? Right.
Mm.
So, I mean, all right. So you had this awakening. Oh my gosh, I'm a
Yeah.
self-pres 1.
Yeah.
How has that, because I know that for you, you're all about these maps to wholeness, right? Creating maps to wholeness,
Right.
not only for yourself, but for others as a coach, right?
Right. Right.
I want to know 2 things from you. How have you used it as a map to wholeness on your own spiritual journey? And then let's start with this question. Then that'll be the second one.
Okay.
What does wholeness mean? That's a word that everyone uses, but if you said to them, all right, define it, they'd kind of go, bleep, bleep, well, you know, I can feel what it is, but I don't quite know how to say it. So can you articulate it?
I'd love to. For me, and how I coach people into a place of wholeness, it's simply an integrated life. It's congruence between our true identity, our spiritual self, our emotional health, and our physical health. We are triune beings. We're spirit, soul, body. We are a spirit. We have a soul. We live in a body. The deepest part of our being, I believe, is spirit. And that, for those who are listening or watching who are Christians, you may have heard this word ruach. The ruach of God breathed life into our being and gave us life. It is that spirit that is the deepest part of our being. And I've found for me, Ian, that when that human spirit was broken because of undealt with hurt, pain, trauma, loss, isolation, that steered me in a fear, shame, control, fear, shame, guilt, motivation. So back to your question, number 1, wholeness is, I believe, living an integrated life between our truest self and our true identity, in our emotional health and our physical health. I think scripture confirms it when we read things like, beloved, I pray that you prosper in all things and be in health, even as your soul prospers. Well, there you have the soul and physical health handshake, if you will. And so that's how I define wholeness.
Yeah. Now I'm going to push you on something else, and I want to talk about trauma, because you've used another word that I think people need clarity on, that they think they know how to define, but don't. Integrated.
Mm-hmm. For me, integrated is, if I were to look at perhaps like a dashboard, if you will, and I were to get up every day and rather ask myself questions, maybe ask the Lord questions and have this dialogue. For instance, Lord, I'm coming to you in truth, and right now I have this deep sense of insecurity. Lord, I know myself, and I can feel like I'm just working harder than I need to get other people's approval, or I'm deeply frustrated about this. Lord, I'm really, really irritated that this happened, and it feels like there's been no resolve to it. I'm going to go to the Lord and enter into a place of dialogue and in my spiritual life, Lord, what do you say? Lord, what do you want me to know about this that I don't currently know, that it's going to help transpose my default narrative? I think we see it like if we read 1 Samuel chapter 30, David inquired of the Lord. David strengthened himself in the Lord, but he inquired, Lord, should I do this? Lord, will this work? You know, he rejected the false narrative of fear, the driver of fear, instead said, Lord, what do you want me to know? Lord, what do you know that I need to know today? So that's the spirit side. The emotional side is also with the Lord or with a counselor, support group, whatever. I'll use grief as an example. I think one of the things that is detrimental to people is not dealing with losses, like ungrieved losses and unresolved disappointment, going, that just happens. And we suppress it, right? And because we don't grieve, guess what happens to the trauma and the physiological stress? Well, it just sits in our cells and sits in our body. We've got to deal with that stuff. You know, the Bible says that laughter is like good medicine. Well, there's that connection again. We're talking about integration between my emotional health. I'll say it this way. When I'm feeling good and when I've got a spirit of joy about me, I believe it's sending congruent waves to my brainstem that then causes the brainstem to release chemicals into my body that are coherent and correlated with the same emotion I'm feeling. In the same way, if I'm full of jealousy and anger and wrath, incoherent communication paths are sent to my brainstem, and in the same way, negative chemicals through the hypothalamus are being sent into my body, causing stress. So there's the integration between spirit and emotional. Now, how does the physical health come into play? Well, I believe we're designed to move, number one, but number two, I think we need to eat food that is alive and living that complements the chemicals that are running through our body, you know. And I can't dive too deeply on this for the sake of time, but right. I just would say that when we eat living food, when we take care of ourselves, when we move, when we exercise, when we sweat, when we get the body moving as it's designed to move, I believe it also releases chemicals that are going to aid us emotionally. You know, like walking and running, I've heard, releases more endorphins and stimulates serotonin just as an antidepressant medication does.
Mm-hmm, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
So I apologize if I've been long-winded.
It's great. And I think it's like I've heard people say, and I think it's a fascinating idea. And the nice thing about the Enneagram is it's a malleable system, right? You can come at it from multiple directions and multiple, in one person, right? You can use it in different ways. I know that some teachers would say that your type is determined by the first trauma you experienced in life. Right. So it's not just hardwiring, but your response to trauma, right, largely determines the type toward which you gravitate as a little child, as a way of coping in the world. So in defining trauma would be very complicated. Let's put it this way. Trauma is the result of an extraordinary stressful event that shatters your sense of security and safety and makes you feel isolated and helpless in the world. Okay. And so the symptoms of it can be anxiety, depression, upsetting emotions, flashbacks of the event, right? That just won't go away. Now, there's two kinds of trauma. There's a one-time event trauma, right? You have an accident, you witness a violent crime, it's a one-time event. That's easier to treat than what's called complex trauma. Yes. And complex trauma is an ongoing, relentless stress, like growing up in a violent neighborhood or growing up with an alcoholic parent where every single day there's unpredictability and things you have to be ready for. Or so actually complex trauma is like Chinese water torture. It's just drip by drip every day, eroding the rock of safety and security. Whereas complex trauma, I mean, one-time trauma is, a single event, right? And to your point, trauma happens when your brain is unable to integrate the experience into the whole person. It can't. You have no folder. There's no folder big enough to get it into among all the other folders in your files, file system in your brain. Think of your brain as filing systems, and there's just one thing, and it gets stuck in the reptilian brain, which is the fight or flight part of the brain. And that's why EMDR, brain spotting, these kinds of technologies, which can take your prefrontal cortex offline, so that you can access the trauma and then reintegrate it integrate it, I should say, for the first time into a place where we would say in therapy, we call it exploding the memory capsule.
Yeah.
So that it's no longer in control of your way of reacting and responding to life as a whole. And so again, I go into that because so many of our listeners ask about trauma. And I think one of the cool things is you've grown in your awareness in your own personal life, where you understand it as integrating the multiple dimensions of the human person. And one of the words that came to me as you were speaking is that it's not just an integrated self, but a reconciled self. It's a self that has reconciled themselves to this happened. And because I've done my work of grieving, of maybe work in psychodrama or whatever, and I'm sure you've done some of these things in your own counseling work, et cetera, where it's like it no longer has the emotional charge that was governing my life for so long. And no wonder you're self-pres, and no wonder you thought you were a 6 who was always predicting, what could happen next, because that's what traumatized people do regardless of type.
Right.
Exactly.
Regardless of type, that's what happens. So I have a question I'm asking every type right now. I'm not necessarily a 5 love languages guy, right?
Yeah.
But as a 1 on the Enneagram, I want to know what you think the love language for most ones, you might speculate, is, right? And do you have a story about it? So like, I don't want you to use the 5 love languages as your choice, your menu. Just, I don't care what you say. It's like, for you personally, forget that whole thing. Just, what is your love language? And do you have a story to kind of communicate it?
I have many stories around this similar experience. And it's when people look me in the eye, tell me they appreciate me, that I did a great job, that I'm valuable to them, that I mean a lot to them, especially when it comes from father figures. I've been told that every little boy needs to hear that, number 1, he's deeply loved, and number 2, that he has what it takes. Well, guess what? It's those 2 communications that fill my tank to overflow. And I've had some key people in my life at key times in my life that have done exactly that. And it's been a game changer. It actually causes me to relax, to breathe, to stop working for the very thing that I already had, which was inherent love and belonging, and cause me to just enjoy the presence of others and enjoy my life in a more meaningful way.
I think beautiful. Do you have a story?
Yeah, one of which happened a couple years ago, and I was in counseling.
Right.
I meet with an incredible guy most Thursday nights, between Wednesdays and Thursdays, I should say. And it was a powerful session. It was deep. And he looked at me at the end, and he said, "I want you to know that I believe in you with all my heart, and I'm committed to you." That's all he said. And it was like a hot knife through butter. I mean, it melted me. I needed those words at that specific time. Simple words, but incredibly effective, because in the place that I had expressed vulnerability, he met me and said, I see you. I see you. You don't have to work anymore for what you already have. And for me, one of the greatest challenges as a one, when the strength of helping others and improving is overextended and becomes perfectionism, I have a tendency to work for things that I already possess. Love, belonging. Yeah.
And, you mentioned, I think, one message that ones also need to hear is you are good. And
Yeah.
it doesn't mean necessarily morally good and when I'm talking about goodness, capital G here, right? Like you are fundamentally good. You are not a mistake. You are not, it's just a very powerful message for ones. That's the message that ones need to hear. You are good. You also mentioned vulnerability, which is something on the transformational path everyone has to work on. Because vulnerability, the ability to say, I made a mistake. Because the one is afraid, if the self-pres one is like, if I'm not perfect, right? Then if I come out and say I made a mistake, they feel like it's like admitting I am a mistake.
That's it.
And only the vulnerability is going to heal that. Right. So
yeah.
You've actually, I can watch you right now, which is not a benefit everybody has, because this is not, YouTube isn't always where they go to listen to this podcast. On 3 occasions in this conversation, one, it was obvious. 2 other times, it was just a look on your face, and the therapist and me kind of leaned in and kind of connected with it. You've been very emotional. One was when, I can't remember what the first one was, but you yourself even said, this makes me emotional. And then the other one was when you were talking about what this man said to you. You took your face, became emotional. And there was one other time, I can't remember when it was. What were you feeling?
Seen.
Keep going.
I'm okay just as I am, right? I don't have to submit my resume to people I've just met in order to be welcomed to have a seat at the table.
Okay. And what was the emotion you felt? Can you name the emotion you felt? Seen is not an emotion. It's a very powerful word. But what was the emotion you felt when you felt seen?
Rested and peaceful.
Okay.
Loved, appreciated.
Okay. Loved, appreciated, belonging.
Yeah.
Again, when you think about feelings, though, as things like grief, sadness, joy. Can you give me a feeling word?
Yeah. I would say joy, although I've never correlated that with what I've expressed. But now that you're kind of probing me, Ian, I'm going, yeah, I think it is joy. And here's why. Because joy allows me to appreciate and value myself for not doing anything other than being true to myself.
Right.
Like my accomplishments, the things I do are so secondary, but for so long I've lived according to the narrative that says, when you do, if you do well, then you're good. Now, no one really imposed that on me, but I think, again, back to what we talked about, it's the nature of the trauma that programmed in that motivation.
So I think probably right now, there's a good number of listeners who are thinking, this guy sounds like a 3, right? Because what you've expressed a lot of times was, if I succeed, if I, my accomplishments, right, then I will be loved. And I'm not saying you are a 3, but the question I have for you is, how would you help them see that you are a 1, not a 3? Like, what is the difference between you and a 3?
The best way I can describe it, and I'm probably not going to do a great job at this, so forgive me in advance, but I've not ever found myself motivated to chameleon myself, perhaps in some ways that the 3 does. In what I understand about people dominant in 3 is they can almost chameleon themselves to their peers, their environment, whatever they need to be for that setting.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas for me, I'm me, but I just, the inner critic drives me to say, work harder, work harder, work harder, work harder, work harder, work harder, work harder. Maybe you'll be seen. So I think that'd be the difference. There is the achievement, in Strengths Finder, achievement is a top 5 strength.
Mm-hmm.
So I am motivated by that, much like the 3. But I've never felt motivated to chameleon myself to adapt. I'm like, no, here's me, but the hamster wheel on the inside is saying, if you want to sustain this, like once you're in the door, Chris, if you want to stay in, you've just got to keep working hard. Mm-hmm. You've got to work. You've got to prove, you've got to achieve, you've got to hit the number, whatever it may be. In my mind, that's how I would differentiate. But again, I don't know if I've done a good job with that.
No, I think you did. But, the unconscious motivation of that 3 is, they have a compulsive need to succeed, to appear successful, and to avoid failure at all costs. For the 1, it would be, I have a need to perfect myself, others, and the world. Mm-hmm. Right. And so if you're, which do you resonate more with the 1 or that 3? Because sometimes 3s and 1s get confused because they both have a high level of commitment to doing and toward excellence. That's all.
I'll say it this way, Ian, because and correct me if I'm wrong in how I'm coming to this conclusion, but I say 1, and here's why: because I see more resonance with a 9-wing and a 2-wing than I do a 2-wing and a 4-wing. Now, I know as a 1, in a path of integration, I'm going to go to a healthy 7. Mm-hmm. And when I'm not doing so hot, I disintegrate to the unhealthy side of a 4. But I just, in a space of wholeness, and back to your question about integration, in a place of integrity, I see the 9 and the 2 poke out in interesting experiences in life.
Fantastic. I wouldn't, just to be clear to everyone listening, I'm not saying you are a 3, but
totally.
But I want them to see that there's no such thing as a pure type. There's no such thing. Mm. So when you begin to think there's a pure type, then everyone's a box. Right. And if you don't, if you sound a little 3-ish, then everybody's like, well, maybe he's a 3, or, so I'm not saying you're a 3. What I'm saying is that we're complicated, and it can take a long time for many of our folks who are listening to discern type, because they'll see features and everything, and sometimes it just takes a while to land, and that's fine. It's not a bad thing,
Ian, can I clarify something? Because I'm just curious about this, having poked the 3 box. This is perhaps what sort of led me to believe that I was a 6 early on. I've never desired to be the spotlight, or surprise birthday parties actually freak me out. I would much rather be the guy who lifts others up.
Yep.
Is it true that 3s actually want that? I love public speaking. I hate small talk. As an introvert, right. I love public speaking.
Right.
I hate small talk. But even in the place of the 6, I've thought, I want to lift other people up.
Right. So there is a 3 that you're describing.
Okay.
It's called the sexual 3, or the 1-to-1 3. And the 1, let me just sort of give you, you want a little snapshot of the 1-to-1 3, or the sexual 3?
Sure.
So they are a little preoccupied with cultivating a desirable image for a real or potential mate, right? And so they a lot of times they'll be more concerned with working out, how they dress, how they appear. When they walk into a room, they're less concerned with fitting into the group than they are with finding one other person with whom they can connect. And they'll sit all night long trying to, connect with that person. A social 3 would be much more concerned with the group. How do I work the group? Where do I fit in the group? Am I at the top of the food chain or at the bottom of the food chain? Because they tie survival to the group.
Yes.
And they want to be valuable to the group because they think that the group will be there for them to help them survive. The 1-to-1 3 is going to be more concerned with a significant other, significant friend, significant partner, because they tie their survival to their mate, right? Or to their friend. Wow. Okay. So for them, they often project the iconic image of their gender. And for them, desirability is really, really important. And here's the thing that they're really well known for, super well known for. For a social 3, success has to do with accomplishments. Okay. It has to do with achievement. It has to do with performing. It has to do with image. For the 1-to-1 3, and this is why they're called the counter type, right? It's the upside down version of 3. They're not as interested in being accomplished and achieved as other types of 3s might be. They're much more concerned about helping others succeed. And they are very concerned with it because for them, who needs to achieve when I've accomplished the image of the one who helps someone else succeed? Does that make sense?
Completely. Yeah, and, that's fascinating.
Yeah. And so, I think they have underneath their image is a fear of rejection, of being found undesirable. And they have a strong need to help an other person. Like, they make great managers.
Yes.
Like in the entertainment world, they make great managers, right? And oftentimes the 1-to-1 3 will be confused with a 6. So, the high end of 6, where that person is all about, I don't need to drive the bus. I can help others become a success. So anyway, this is how the Enneagram gets complicated.
That's fascinating.
And this is why subtypes are so darn important.
Man.
Because, there were times in our conversation today when I thought, there's another possibility here, which is that there's a 1-to-1 3 in the room. I'm not saying you are, but it's just helpful for people to say, if they feel like they're in that space, go look at 1. Go look at a 1-to-1 3. Go look at a self-pres, 6. Is that what you thought you were? Was a self-pres 6 or a socialist?
Yeah, it's self-pres. Yeah.
Okay. So again, I'm throwing it out there just for the sake of, educating listeners about stuff. But that 1-to-1, because it's called a subtype, is very different looking than the social 1, which is the iconic, social 3, which is very much the iconic 3. So everybody should, again, check it out. So anyway, Chris, this has been fantastic. Rich conversation. Can you just tell everybody where they can learn more about what you're doing, your social channels, all that stuff? I want them to hear about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I host a podcast called Win Today with Christopher Cook. It's a weekly podcast. You can find that on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeart Radio, wherever podcasts are available. I actually just started bringing it to YouTube and video as well, which has been a fun journey. WinToday.tv is the home base for the blog, for the podcast, for show notes, etc. And then you can find me on Instagram at 00ChrisCook. I'm also on Facebook at just look up Christopher Cook and you'll find me there.
Great. Thank you, man. Thank you. Rich conversation. Love having me some ones on the show. And Anthony,
yes,
you know how I'm going to close this out, don't you?
Be yourself.
Everybody else is already taken. Until next time.